Hi, it's Pastor Andy with our Monday discipleship video, and because we had a special service yesterday, I'm continuing with the look at the prophetic vision that Ezekiel had in Ezekiel chapters 40 through 48. And if you didn't see last week's videos, the two discipleship videos, I encourage you to go back and watch those because it'll give you a little bit of the context for what those visions are and the uniqueness of the book of Ezekiel, starting with one type of challenging vision to understand and then concluding with a different challenge, and that is that there are all kinds of interpretations that are seemingly viable, but all of them have some challenges into the viability of those understandings, interpretations. So I'm going to cover two today. First one I'm going to look at is that this vision remains unfilled. Now, this vision gets a lot of credibility from other accounts in the Bible, especially from those who wrote after the exile, what we call post-exilic writings or post-exilic leaders. Exilic meaning exile, so after the exile. People like Nehemiah, people like Ezra, people like Haggai, etc. And what we see in those is that the later temple that was built after the exile with the people in Babylon was nothing like the former temple, the temple that was built and dedicated during the time of Solomon and remained some 300 years or so. Well, the problem is that because these were so different and the magnitude and the magnificence of this temple that is in Ezekiel 40 through 48, the idea is that, well, the people were not able to construct this temple. Why? Perhaps it was finances. Perhaps it was laziness. If you read Haggai, it talks about the fact that the people are more concerned with fixing their homes than they are building the temple of the Lord. And so there could be some with that. But there was nothing in Scripture like the temple that is described in Ezekiel. So again, maybe financially related, maybe something else. Whatever the case might have been, the temple that was built after the exile ended, when the people returned back to Israel and specifically to Jerusalem, the second temple was nothing like the first temple and not at all in comparison to this vision that Ezekiel had. Therefore, many will say that the proper interpretation of this is that this is an idealized vision. That God is giving Ezekiel an ideal look at what the temple could have been or should have been. And perhaps that's possible, but one of the problems with that interpretation is at the beginning of this extended passage, at the beginning of these chapters, where it says, Ezekiel was told to look with your eyes and hear with your ears and set your heart upon all that I show you, for you were brought here in order that I might show it to you. This is a vision, but this is not a dream. This is something concrete. Ezekiel is seeing something real before him. He's hearing something, as that said. Hear with your ears. He is hearing something that is before him. And so, in one sense, what Ezekiel is seeing is a temple that is already made. It is already there. The people made the tabernacle. In Exodus chapter 25. Solomon built the temple. 1 Kings chapter 6, for instance, 2 Chronicles 3. Ezekiel is never told to build this new complex. He is commanded to declare, he is commanded to make known what he sees, because the complex has already been built, presumably, by God. So, if this was an unfulfilled vision, it is still unfulfilled, and therefore we might consider it to be a future vision, a temple for the future. And that leads us to the next idea of interpretation, and that is a fulfillment in the millennial reign. Now, for the millennium, we have to go to Revelation chapter 20, when it talks about the fact that Messiah will come, that Jesus will come and reign for 1,000 years, will reign for 1,000 years over the earth. That's why we call it a millennium. Or the millennial reign is because 1,000 means or has the idea of millennial. So this new temple, this interpretation suggests that during that 1,000 years, this is the temple that will be in place where the king will reign. Now, this vision provides a lot of details about the structure of the building, but some of those details are missing. The walls of this building, though, could be used to separate the sacred from the profane, if you want to use it in that word, not like profanity, but the things that are not holy, the things that are not sacred. So the walls could be that barrier for that. It does mention in chapter 45 also the idea of a prince. And many have argued that the prince that will come, as Ezekiel describes, is going to be Messiah, is going to be the one who rules over the world for this 1,000 years. Now, could that be Messiah? Many Jews believe it's Messiah. Many Christians, at least those who have a certain mindset about the end times, and I'm not saying that mindset's wrong, I'm just saying there's so many different ways to interpret the end times. But certain Christians will have that mindset that the Messiah is indeed that prince. So, the argument, though, it remains coming back to the sacrificial system. If only a part of it is fulfilled in the short term, perhaps what was being suggested is that the people would sacrifice when they returned from exile, but in this future time, there would not be a sacrifice because it did not apply any longer after the ultimate sacrifice that Jesus made on our behalf. But there is a lack of prominence in this about the prince. There is not enough said about the prince in this to really show that the emphasis would be on the prince as opposed to on the temple. In the Old Testament, the tabernacle was indicated where God's presence would be. The temple indicated where God's presence would be. And the people began to mistake the importance of the tabernacle and later the temple, putting that above God. So if God has corrected that by saying that this is about me, not about a place, as the New Testament indicates that our heart is His throne, so to speak, for now, then it would seem odd that God would emphasize a building over the person. So that would be a major challenge to this particular interpretation, that the sanctuary of Yahweh, meaning this temple, took a higher precedence over Yahweh Himself. It would almost be a form of promoting idolatry, which certainly God would not do. So, is this a reasonable interpretation? There's challenges with all of these. There's possibilities with the two I've mentioned today and the three I'll mention on Wednesday, but there is a lot that can be said about this particular interpretation that lends many people to believe this is probably the most likely of the five. Is it? Only God knows, but it does have a lot of strong points to it. We'll talk about the other three interpretations on Wednesday.